Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special live episode of A Theologica with yours truly, Derek Bennett. Today, I have with us Dr. Dan Durbin. Now, Dr. Durbin has been an educator for over 30 years. He has a doctorate in leadership and organizational development, and he was my actual high school speech and debate coach. He had a major impact on who I am in many ways and how I go about conducting myself. So I think that you'll probably see in the course of the interview, you'll probably pick up on just a little bit of that, and you may learn a little bit more about me. We are, of course, today going to be discussing the very highly important and relevant topic, Christian nationalism. Dan has quite a bit to say about this. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on board Dr. Dan Durbin. How are you today, sir?
Doing fine, Derek. It's nice to see you grown and making good decisions.
Finally. I'm sure you picked up on the fact that, I learned some wonderful things from you along the years, but it would take just a little while before some of the seeds you planted would begin to sprout. But at least we're getting there. Hey, I've got something I need to tell you, Dr. Dan Durbin.
I want to ask you a bunch of questions, and I want to have them answered immediately.
Got me?
I got you. Go for it.
So why don't you start out by telling us about yourself and about your background?
Well, I'm a normal guy who's done a whole lot of reading, writing, arithmetic. My life started out as a kid coming from a white trash neighborhood with a mama who had a lot of kids and not much support. So I've seen the non-Christian world, I've seen the Christian world, and I've seen the wannabe Christian world. I was fortunate enough in my life to be put in a foster home, and that foster home helped me learn a lot about who I was and what kind of human being and man I would be. After serving time in the military, I got myself into education, and it was a great place to be for a kid who wanted to give back what he had learned in his life. So doing those kinds of things, I went through the Teacher of the Year, Milken Award winner, all kinds of things that helped me understand one thing. One person can do a lot of things, but they never do it by themselves. And I started to look at that and say, okay, what am I going to do with this? I went ahead and got my doctorate. And most of my life has been either teaching at the high school or university level, or it's been going to places who have projects that they want to complete and taking a role within their organization, coming up with a plan for them, helping them implement the plan, and then to evaluate and monitor the plan. So it's been a great career and a great life, and I'm just looking forward to the next project that comes along.
Excellent. Well, you've got your work cut out for you, because today we're going to be discussing, of course, Christian nationalism. Dan, in your words, what is Christian nationalism?
Well, it's a political theory, a cultural framework to say that seeks to merge American and Christian ideologies and identities together. That's what it does. And what it also does is it suggests that real Americans are Christians. So you can't be a real American if you're not a Christian, according to Christian nationalists. And that true Christians hold a particular set of religious beliefs. So not only are you left out if you are a Christian nationalist, aren't a Christian nationalist, but you're also left out if you don't believe exactly the way those Christian nationalists believe Christianity is supposed to believe. And the term Christian is more of a national identity than it is a religion. So Christian nationalism is really a distortion of the Christian faith, in my opinion, and that it uses the language, the symbols, the imagery of Christianity and bastardizes that. And it may look and sound like Christianity to the casual observer, but when you give that and you examine it and you truly study it, that veneer, that facade on the outside of Jesus Christ, it's not directed toward Jesus. It's directed toward either a political figure, a party, or ideology of that party. And then you start to look at how it overlaps and provides cover for white nationalism and racial segregation. It creates this sense of belonging that is limited with certain people associated with founding of the United States of America. So that's namely white Christians. So to me, in a summary of that, we're really talking about white nationalism using Christianity as a way to hide their intent. And the sad part is there are a lot of Christians who don't know that they've been taken for a ride. They came into it. For example, I will tell you that I didn't go to church a lot when I was a little kid. There might be an occasional thing where the local church had something and I had a friend in the neighborhood invite me. But Christianity wasn't something that was a part of my life until I became a kid that was living on the streets and I got taken into a foster home. Now, no one could tell me that the beliefs of my foster home, which were Christian, were not solid, because I don't remember ever having conversations about how bad people were. I don't remember having politician type discussions in that house. We were raised in that house to believe that Jesus Christ and his teachings were about helping people, were about loving and caring for people. And so as I began to look into that myself, and I had some time to grow up, went into the military, traveled a lot of the world, I began to ask questions about how I was raised. And one of my first jobs for teaching was in San Antonio, Texas. And I went out of the military right into the classroom, loved what I was doing. But one of the things that I had to do in order to teach at this Christian school was I needed to go to services at the church that sponsored it. And I got an opportunity to listen to what was being said. Now, this is in 1980. So when you look at 1980, many of the things that you are witnessing right now, I heard being planned then. I would hear in sermons about the Christians taking over and that God had anointed them to take over. I would hear quotes from politicians. I would see some pretty strange religious practices that went along with that. But what I began to notice was that Christianity that I was taught as a teenager and the Christianity I was experiencing in this particular location, this one over here concentrated on Jesus Christ and his teaching. This one over here concentrated on things that reflected politics, that reflected exclusion. Instead of talking about how to feed the hungry, we were told how the hungry hadn't done what God told them to do. So that experience And many more like it throughout my life got me to start thinking, is this the same group? Because I went back to my hometown and I had gone to churches that I didn't hear any of that. It was more about what are we going to do to help this world better and make it better. So it forced me to start reading and taking classes and courses and trying to find out about religious history and understand how it all fit together. And then I suddenly realized it wasn't religious history alone I needed to study. It was politics. Because the Christian faith, from its beginning, has been engaged in politics. It may have been for good reasons. For example, it's kind of hard to have this fledgling Christian faith to be accepted if the government doesn't accept it. And you find that when you study history, one of the greatest people for the Bible that helped history was Paul. What was it that Paul did for Christianity? And Paul's the guy who was saying, it's not just for you guys over here, it's for the Gentiles as well. And what did he do? He ran around and he preached that gospel. And the numbers in the Roman Empire, for example, for Christians started to rise. And what is it that a leader in the Roman Empire would start to notice and start to have to plan for if he was to survive? Because the reality, after Christianity became an official religion for the Roman Empire, it immediately became a part of politics. And we don't have time to discuss it right now, but if you go back and you study that period of time, you can see that, in my opinion, Christianity sold its soul. It took that dark man of Middle Eastern descent, and they converted it into a political scheme that had all kinds of compromises, not the original. And by the way, I hear too many Christians talk about how, Jesus, his Christianity, Jesus was not a Christian. It wasn't what Jesus sold. He didn't say, my Christians, you will follow me. He just said, people, I suggest you follow me. He gave those teachings. So when you look at that, the emperor at the time, what did he do? He embraced those numbers. Now, granted, it was 303 and Constantine was the ruler at the time, and he was the sole ruler for most of that time. He realized that those numbers were increasing. And you had all kinds of sects of Christianity throughout the land. But suddenly there were compromises being made. And those compromises would say that this particular Christianity and its practices would be exactly what we were going to support. So many scholars will allege that his main objective for doing that had nothing to do with the fact that his mother introduced him to Christianity and all that stuff. It didn't. It was to gain unanimous approval and submission to his authority from all the classes. And he chose Christianity to conduct what I call a political propaganda, and believing that it was the most appropriate religion that would fit an imperial cult. Now, you're hearing what I just said there? I'm just going to ask you, does that sound any different than things that you're hearing today in our country? So we've been through this before, and not just at that moment, but other times in our history. We've been through this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Hans Pulsander. He was a professor. He's a professor. And he says that Constantine's conversion was just another political tool instrument for him. And that he knew, in order to get his political interests served, and keep the empire under his rule that he needed to control. And he felt that Christianity and getting control of those folks would serve that purpose. So I ask you one more time, does any of this sound familiar to people? You can go back and study Woodrow Wilson and his presidency, even Abraham Lincoln and his presidency, and you find where even now in the Americas, you had this whole Christian nationalism kind of theme going. And of course, people will argue that the Constitution and everything was made under the Christian rule and so on and so on. And it's another conversation to actually set that straight and say exactly what the people who wrote that thing had to say about religion itself. So that's kind of my picture of how Christian nationalism and how it became a part of who we are today. Any more questions?
So, looking back, you covered a lot of territory just right there. But looking back, what we see then is because of the wide appeal that Christianity had to many people, it was a really easy tool to exploit. And so from the earliest days of this religion, it's something that has been used to seek power and control.
Okay,
Am I understanding you right?
That's partly part of it, but let's be fair to Christianity. Whether you believe it or you don't believe it, Christianity started out as a faith. Those were people that were being preached to that needed something, whether it was the socialization of the world or promises of a better life. The list just goes on. They needed something. And you can go through a lot of faiths and religions that promise that to people. When people need, they are much more apt to accept any compromise that they can get. Look what happened in the early church. There were people at first hiding for their lives because they were being persecuted. They were being killed. And let's face it, Constantine got credit for doing some of that until it became a political necessity. Then all of a sudden, you don't have to be killed. You can now be a part of the inside. And that's how we fool people. Everyone thinks that they're on the inside of these types of things. And so once they've been indoctrinated, the little Christian school that I taught at back in the 80s, I enjoyed being around those kids. But I also watched them be indoctrinated every single day. There was no questioning. No one said, look into this and make sure that you not only accept it, but you accept it because you believe it. It's proven to you. As a matter of fact, it was just the opposite. It was a tendency to, we want you to believe this and do not question it. And that's one of the things that we do in Christianity is we use the excuse by faith. It's by faith that you believe. Okay, I can accept that by faith. I accepted that my wife loved me by faith. But guess what? There was a whole lot of evidence that proved that. It wasn't just accepted by faith. Now I'll go do whatever I want to. And in Christianity, we use that little excuse of saying by faith, and it's another way of saying, don't listen to anything else. Don't research. Don't look at history. You accept what we've said to you, and we will tell you what it means. I mean, in the early years of the Catholic Church, it took a lot of years before they said you could read the Bible. Why? Because they said you would misinterpret it and only Only the person in the pulpit preaching to you could tell you what it meant. So there was none of this free to explore, to question. So when we look at Christian nationalism, what have they done? When you look back into the 80s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and you got Newt Gingrich and that group of politicians, they were talking about this very moment, that the way to control Americans is through their faith, and Christianity is the predominant faith. So let's get a hold of them, as Constantine did, and let's control what they think and feel. We will use their faith against them. We will get them to the point where, as long as we say terms like Jesus and we say terms like the church, we will get them to where they don't question what we're doing. And there's been this recreation of what the Christian looks like. I just love the fact I'm on a lot of blogs, ed blogs, and we talk about these types of things. And I hear a lot of people talk about, well, Jesus was this. Well, first of all, let's admit it, Jesus was a Middle Eastern. He wasn't white. So if you want to say Jesus was a white guy, he wasn't. But if that's the symbol you need for your faith, then I see that that's what you've grown into. So I can accept that from you. But don't act like that Jesus was some kind of Western figure. We've gone as far in Christian nationalism as to make Jesus a cowboy. That he is that rough and tough guy that goes throughout and takes care of all of our problems and all of the bad guys out there. And we can depend on him to take care of us that way. Well, that's a nice little image, but I don't think any of the studying I did for almost 40 years now gives Jesus, the Middle Eastern one that all of this came from, gives him the appeal of a cowboy. We have to understand that what we're practicing in this country, we recreated in our own images. And by doing that, we've bastardized the very faith that we say that we trust. Now, does that mean that Christians are bad? Absolutely not. There are a lot of good, solid people who believe in Christianity, who live the life that the original Jesus promoted. They are good people. They worship their God. But when I talk with people who say we have to take over things because Jesus is calling us to make everyone a Christian. Well, they fought the Crusades for that, didn't they? And here we are again, getting ready to fight the Crusades so that we can make everyone a Christian. Well, people have asked me throughout the years, why is it that you won't tell us if you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you are this or that? Well, first of all, I don't believe it's my job to sway my students one way or the other about those things. It's my job to teach them how to research, to teach them how to process, but to gather that information and process it themselves. So I would never have said, we're going to do it this way. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. I've always said I'm an independent thinker. And that's exactly how I've tried to live my life, lose my life sometimes, but live my life. The point being, we spend way too much time right now watching what I think is another crusade. And that crusade, there will be, as in the first ones, there will be excuses to do things that don't follow what the teachings of Jesus actually taught us. And those things you can see happening all around us. It's okay I remember I met with a family back when I was a teacher, and their son had done something, and we were talking about what we were going to do. And one of the family members said, well, we're just not going to tell the truth about that because that's not good for the case. And I said, aren't you devoted Catholics? And one of them said, yes, but the other side's not Catholic. When you start to look at how we live our lives, the tribalism that this country has created in every single aspect of our people, our politics, our religion, it becomes a tribal type of thing. And so we don't have to live the life that we proclaim because we have an excuse. We've been the chosen one. I'm gonna get some quotes for you. And this guy, tell me if you know who he is. We, the church, are God's governing body on earth. That's a direct quote. Now, you could think of that and you could say Billy Graham. Who else could you say? Got any more? Evangelist.
Jerry Falwell or
The list goes on and on.
Pat Robertson. Right.
Okay. But this guy also said, we have been given legal power and authority from heaven. Same guy. He also said, we are delegated by him to destroy every attempted advance of the enemy. And the enemy is everybody but us. Have any idea who that guy is? Well, his name is William.
Go ahead.
His name is William Dutch Sheets. And he's a leading figure in the whole fundamentalist movement, modern day, right now. And if you want to see him, go to some of the pictures online, and he will be standing behind Marjorie Taylor Greene with his hands in the air. And what is it that they believe? That America is anointed by God to convert the entire world to Christianity by force, if necessary. And they seek to accelerate Jesus' return and rule over the earth. Now, I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent. But when you get to the point where helping poor people have shelter and food, and that is not even a consideration, but you are constantly preparing for a battle, it's kind of hard to get people to fight. I think it's really a comical thing. I brought this with me. It's a book that I've been reading. There it is, a picture of it. And you might want to post it for people because this is called Preparing for War. And the author of it is Bradley Onishy. I think that's how you pronounce it. And here's the sub: The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next. And he had the experiences I had, except he was a kid that experienced it. And now he's speaking out about what he saw and comparing and contrasting what the message of Jesus Christ really was to what we're really practicing. So this whole thing is right here in our faces. And we have to ask ourselves, why is it in our faces? It's there because we have had a period in our political and social cycle where our leaders have been very bold about saying things. Now, I had a class that I was teaching, and somebody said, well, Bill Clinton, he broke the commandments and cheated on his wife. Yes, he did. And he would have to deal with that. But I find it awfully amazing that here we are years later, and we have politicians doing far worse stuff and far more worse stuff. And our Christian community, the community that said Bill Clinton needed to resign, and I'm not saying I disagree with them, but they're now saying those things are okay. They're all right. We can overlook them because Bill Clinton wasn't anointed by God to be in that seat, and the other guy is anointed by God.
Franklin Graham.
Really?
Franklin Graham did just that, didn't he? Yep.
Yes, he did.
Yep. He came down hard on Bill Clinton, but Donald Trump gets a total pass.
Yeah. But it's what they're putting in their brains to say, the guy who puts us at the top of that heap. Here's the reality that we have to start to look at. Christianity, I have a lot of Christian friends. I sang in the choir, went to church because I love singing in the choir with them. I love the socialization part of it. But I've always rejected the sense that the life of Christ was anything near what Christian nationalists practice in our country right now. And it's not a sense of things are bad. It is happening in front of our very eyes. And that makes it like kind of we've got to do something now to turn that around, instead of just saying it'll go away. Because the deeper we get into this type of philosophy, into this type of behavior, even if Jesus didn't exist, Derek, what did he give in his teachings? Well, the teachings are not too bad to listen to and to live by. So let's say he didn't rise from the dead. Let's say that a lot of the miracles he did didn't happen. Those things that he said, live your life by, is not a bad thing, which Western society has latched onto. The problem is the very pureness of that message has been replaced with a political Christianity that is really there for power and really there to force others to think and feel and sound like you want them to. And the scary part for all of America is that when those folks say, like Sheets did, that we have to advance on the enemy and everyone else is the enemy, and then we see politicians standing in front of them, that's a fear thing that I think this country needs to wake up to.
What is it, in addition to seeking this kind of power and control, what else do you see about Christian nationalists and much of the modern GOP that so starkly contrasts with Jesus and his message? I know some of this you've covered, but if you want to expand on that.
Yeah. Well, you think about the 80s, the rise of the family. What was it? They were the party of family and family values, all those types of things. The problem is that suddenly it's not everybody's family. If you don't be the family that we think you should be as a Christian nationalist, then you don't get to count. As a matter of fact, we can use the law, we can use government against you to annihilate who you are. And that, to me, was something that I began to realize not only in the 80s, but the 90s. And when it suddenly became the predominant message in the 2000s. And so it was very clear to me that we'd been working toward this for decades, not just something that just happened. So the values that we say that we promote, those aren't the values that Jesus would have said. Jesus didn't go stone the prostitute. Jesus didn't do those things to the needs of people. Yet we today will say, let's let children go hungry. Now, no one would admit it if you're a Christian nationalist. Well, that's not what we really meant. No, that's really what you meant, because that's what you did. You can say what you want, but it's your actions that show who you are. And I get it. I realize that there's a disagreement in this country about small government, expansive government. I get that stuff. And I understand that we're a constitutional republic, for example, and that most people don't even know that that is a form of democracy. But if you listen to our politicians these days, they will tell you we're not a democracy in any shape or form. And they will tell you that really, you people go sit back. Let us take care of it for you. So that's another thing that I've seen developing over the years. The voice of Americans has become tribal in the sense that if we give you enough food, now think about it, if you can get the middle class in this country to have enough food and have a refrigerator and a television with a car in the driveway, how much do they question what's going on? Not much, until it's too late. And then we're just so surprised that they did that to us. But if you are an insider, you know what's going on and you don't care who gets hurt doing it. And I have people who all the time say to me, you're being pessimistic and that's not the way then prove it. Then prove that. Quit saying things. I'm one of those people who likes to go to Twitter for the only purpose of reading what people are saying they're doing. And I see politicians all the time that say, look what we're doing. They think that we as human beings are too ignorant to research, to question them. Well, there is a group that is too ignorant to do that. And they're either ignorant or they're stupid. And Derek, do you remember the difference between ignorance and stupidity? It's ignorance you don't know. Stupidity.
Please remind me.
Yes, stupidity you know, but you choose to ignore. And we're in a country right now where we have a lot of people who know better, who know what truth is, but they choose to ignore it because it satisfies their mission in life. That doesn't include everyone. So is this country a constitutional republic? Yes, it is. And there are things that the government was meant to do and it's not doing. There are things that maybe the government did overreach on, but it never said that it was going to use the faith of a country to go after people who didn't believe like them. And that is a serious, serious mistake that we are allowing to happen when we try to say that there's one religion and it's ours. And if you don't like it, you can leave. Well, here's my message. My message is, no, I'm not going anywhere. You might well tell me if you don't like it, you can leave and you push everyone out. But I think maybe even at my age, we join Generation Z and say, hell no, we won't go. So this is an important stage in American history. Does there have to be a, quote, civil war? If you notice, every damn thing we talk about has to be a war. Why? Because our government was never meant to be getting into the social issues that it's in. Now, all of a sudden, because Christian nationalism says that it's wrong to have an abortion, that it's wrong to do this, that it's wrong to do this, it's a war every single day. And when our kids are sitting around hearing this, And they're also being told, don't question, by faith. We come up with a really ignorant future. And that's the part that kind of bothers me a lot, that we're not teaching kids. We shouldn't be teaching kids what to think. We should be teaching them how to think, and that they can take this information, they can research, they can be the intelligent human beings they are, and use that to come up to conclusions. This thing we have is we've got most of our world working on something called the truth. And you know what the truth is? There's really quickly 4 angles of the truth. The first angle of the truth is my truth. And if I'm a kid, everything that comes around me comes from within me, because if my parents will let me go to a party and I go sneak out and do it, I can justify that in my mind because they just don't understand. So my truth comes from within. And it's always very personal. Then we have something called the truth. If you are religious or you have a political ideology, what you find yourself doing is saying, I've got the truth. And what does the mean? The means you've got the one. So it's like you have blinders on. And no matter what information comes in through those blinders, you're protected. You don't consider other information. You don't consider situations. And then you've got a truth called a truth. And there's all these little truths out here. The Muslims are over here, the Baptists over here, the Catholics over here, da, 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 da. And as long as you don't step into my bailiwick, then you can do whatever you want. Now, all 3 of those have some pros and cons. My truth, well, there's kind of a self-protection there. The truth can give you a path in which to go down. And a truth can help you learn to accept other people's ways of thinking. And there's also negatives to each of that. The selfishness that my truth brings. The truth cancels out everything else. A truth sometimes lets you sit back and watch a country be invaded and say, it's really none of our business. But truth doesn't look like any of those 3 things. From the time you're born till about 3 or 4, you start laying layers of information and knowledge that you take in. And you wake up the next day and you add another layer. And it may not be as much. So by the time you've added these layers, you've created throughout your life a pyramid. And that pyramid helps you because you change and evolve with the information. So what you believed yesterday, something you got today, could change everything that you believed. For example, you might have thought as a student that Dan Durbin was the biggest asshole you had ever met. He was always on your case, always telling you to do things a certain way. Occasionally. But one day you're out in the rain and your tire is flat and you are stuck. And he pulls up behind you and he says, let's get you out of the rain and get this solved. When you get home, you say, I used to hate that guy, but I got to tell you, when it mattered, he was there. You, based on experience and new information, can evolve your thinking. Now, as you go, it takes less information. That's why we look at grandparents and we say, we just said a few words and she said the following. All of this information when you're younger, you're taking it in, but you don't understand all of it. So if you take that pyramid and you turn it upside down, When you're a baby, you take in more, but you understand less. But as you grow and age and evolve, it takes less information to have more wisdom and understanding. For me, that's how I see truth, which means if we try to tell everyone we have the answer, this is it, then you're dealing in the truth. And you are saying that nothing else matters, nothing else counts. And you will excuse your own behaviors, and you will excuse the inconsistencies of others as long as your truth, the truth, is justified. So, yes, I grew up, and through all the years of teaching and so on, I've tried to look at Christianity not as, do we have to debate with Derek whether it exists or not? It is what people have accepted as their guiding post. What bothers me about it is not that people believe it, is that they take what they believe and they bastardize it for political purposes. And to me, that's the central question. Okay, I'm done.
That's just it, and that's well, and I just want to say, this seeking for absolute control and power, it's so completely antithetical to what America was supposed to be and what it was that our founding fathers actually intended. The whole separation of church and state thing, that's become controversial now when it really shouldn't be. As I point out in my last video on Christian nationalism, that absolutely is what they intended. When Jefferson was discussing the religion clause of the First Amendment, he absolutely lays it out that yes, this was intended to separate church and state. They knew that you were going to be in big trouble if you had the two intermixing based on everything that they had experienced and observed themselves. And they knew that by mixing the two, you would prohibit real religious freedom in this country. Actual pluralism. As Jefferson said, this is supposed to be a country for the Muslim, the Hindu, Christian infidel, and Jew. This is supposed to be a place where you can believe and practice freely as you choose. And so what they're doing is it's un-American. It is un-American. Dan, if I hear you right, I think what you're saying to me is that there is an opportunity for people to take a step back and take a good hard look in the mirror. There's an opportunity for people to learn and to grow, to do some research and get a better understanding about what this country was supposed to be and what it is, how it is that we are moving in very much in the wrong direction. And having done that, there's an opportunity for us as citizens to do something about it. Is that not right?
Well, that's true, but understand this is not going to be an easy move because there have been decades of indoctrination. I have nothing against a Christian school, a Jewish school. Doesn't some things that you want taught to your children, that's fine. But the indoctrination that our adult Christians have had, they've not been taught how to think outside that. And so they become offended because the truth is being challenged. And because of that, there's anger. And there's, I've seen people sit and have conversations, and when one side decides that the other just doesn't get it, then they get nasty and the anger comes out. There's where we're at now. We're at a place where both sides have legitimate concerns. They have legitimate feelings. But why they have those feelings and the legitimacy of those feelings is what we don't really talk about most of the time. When I had students in the Christian school back in the 80s, I still hear from a lot of them. Guess what they're not doing now? Going to church.
What's that?
Because what they experienced as a child growing up is not what they learned, those that went away to college and traveled. And they began to question. That questioning, if it had been allowed in an earlier time, would have probably kept them with their faith. But it didn't happen. And now they feel deceived. They feel like they had been used. And for me, that's when you kill the spirit of the child, when you take away the ability to question and seek answers. So yes, I think this is a problem for us, but I don't think it's a problem that Jesus Christians have. I think it's the bastardization of that by people who use it for another purpose that really puts us in the most danger. Would you like me to sing and dance now?
Guys, this has been no, this has been a very powerful discussion, as they tend to be with you, Dan. We are going to go ahead and move on to, I think we've got at least one or two super chats in the queue here. But guys, do go ahead and get those prepared, because we are going to go ahead and move on to that Q&A segment. But the final words from me is just that, take this opportunity to really learn and assess and grow, and based on what you're seeing and the real threat to our democracy and our freedom and our religious freedom in this country, be an active citizen and vote. Would you agree with that, Dan?
I agree. The sad part that we're experiencing is that we've got a lot of people who don't want you to vote. Why? Because your vote does count. You may not think it does, because we're in this representative government where someone's voted in, he doesn't have to listen to you. Well, you get to vote him out. The problem is that we don't pay attention to what's going on, and we become so tribalized that we don't question what we're going to vote the next circle around and why. So this whole thing about voting, the conversation that needs to be there is that informed voters, and not informed in the sense that your tribe told you what to think, but you actually are paying attention. Why in the world, Derek, do you think we're trying to make the media? Now, I'm not saying the media is perfect. And there are both sides, extremists, who are saying some pretty stupid things. But why would we want the media to be totally destroyed in our country, except for those who say what we want them to say? Because it's not about getting information to vote. We're looking at how can we keep people from voting. If there are problems with the voting system, then come together as two parties and figure out how to fix it. But don't eliminate it. And if you're afraid of something going the other guy's way, don't go against the very principles of the right to vote. Gerrymandering is one of the biggest, not secrets, in this entire country. We know it's going on. And who cares anymore? Because as long as our party's getting by with it, and I'm talking about Republicans and Democrats, we don't care. Well, that's not how the system works for old guys like me, who were taught that America was something different, that it was better because it was honest. Now, granted, throughout our history, there have been dishonest things going on in our government. But as a kid, I can remember having such pride. And when we had the 4th of July was a celebration of a love for your country because you believed it. And we have Americans right now, they only believe in the truth they have. And it's not America unless their truth is front and center. So this whole voting thing you just brought up, it's something I think you and some people who know a lot more about it than I do ought to have a conversation about.
Excellent.
And I went over again.
We'll go to our first. You're good. We'll go to our first super chat here from MNAG for $49.99. Holy shizen. Thank you so much, MNAG. Very, very much appreciated. He asks, what's happening in politics is exactly what happens inside evangelical churches. You have to follow the pastors because he is the speaker of God. You don't question or argue any discussion. The whole Bible promotes totalitarian rule.
And
anything to say to that, Dan?
Let me tell you something. This is so interesting because nothing's changed, Derek. When you talk about the early church going into the Roman Empire, the church itself was structured after the government. And so everything it did was a mirror of how the government did their thing. And I agree with them 100%. This thing we have, one of the things, churches that I went to that I found a little refreshing was a Presbyterian church. And the reason why I found it refreshing is because the minister there didn't do any of that. He literally would allow people to question. And they together would talk through things. And they actually made adjustments to their processes and things that they did based on the fact that everybody got to have things. But you know what they did well? It was all in good order. Our government right now can only exist if they have total control. To allow people to actually question what's going on and not either lie about it, misdirect, misrepresent. It's not the government that I remember as a kid. Guess what? It was still going on then too. They just weren't exposed the way it is now. And I believe that the last, 7, 8 years, we've just decided to hell with it. We're going to do who we are because our leader said it's okay. Our leader says it's okay if you, what did he say? I think he said, I could be in the middle of the street and shoot somebody and they'd still vote for me. The problem is that the normal Christian years ago would have said, absolutely not. No, that's not how it is. We still believe in that we shouldn't kill people. We shouldn't persecute people. We shouldn't do these things. All of that is off the table now. But isn't it amazing? We look at all of Christianity and the people who have led and lived the Christian life, worked hard, took care of others and themselves, so on. Yet we now look at the things it's okay to do. It's okay to go to bed with somebody other than your wife. It's okay to sexually harass people. It's okay. None of that is okay. Not based on societal norms. Is it not ironic that societal norms, people are saying absolutely not, and into the Christian norms of the nationalism, it's okay, are not talked about. Now, I don't want to get political about that, but when our topic today is asking us a very question that he's saying, if pastors are in their churches promoting this type of behavior and keeping control so that everyone doesn't ask questions you don't want to ask. We really got to ask ourselves whether or not being tax-free is what churches should have if politics is a part of what's governing them. And I bring that up to you because I'm not one of those guys who want to stir things up. But if the separation isn't there, and churches and Christianity under the whole Christian nationalism flag is being used in this country for politics, then that church needs to be questioning whether or not getting tax breaks is for them. Because you have the right to do those things. You just don't have the right to do it and take the tax cut. So he brings on that whole idea of looking at our government, looking what's happening in churches, and how the two have melted together to where they're not separate anymore. Okay?
Well said. Imnag, again, very much appreciate the super chat. That was very generous, and you really got Dan going with that one. So thank you so much. Let's see if do we have anything else here? Do we have anything else in terms of super chats? This is going to be the last call. Last call for super chats. I don't see any more at the moment, but guys, if you want to get them in now, because we'll probably be wrapping this up here fairly soon. What does evangelical? Because we know that, and we're not wanting to paint all Christians with the same broad brush, of course, but we know that there is widespread evangelical support for Donald Trump. What does this say about those kinds of evangelicals?
Well, it's not about just evangelical. It's about uninformed. There are a lot of people who don't realize that they fit in that category. And it's most of the stuff I've put out there for you. They don't realize it because they've been raised with it. And it fits their particular life. And if your entire life that has been in your face, but yet we can't understand that same idea when it comes to the people who don't like Muslims. Well, if you really study the Muslim world, you find that not everybody in the Muslim world is a terrorist. Just like not everybody in the Christian world is a Christian nationalist and wants to use the AR-15 to kill people. And we can't take our logic and put it down in a foundation. The real thing in our world that in order to survive in it, you have to have developed a foundation of values. And sooner or later, you get to the point where you talk about your non-negotiable values. These things are not negotiable no matter what. My son used to laugh because if I came out of a store and I counted my money and I had $1 too much, I would turn around and walk back in and give the $1 back. Why do you do that? Because that person who gave me too much money will have to pay for that out of her own pocket at the end of the day. One of my non-negotiables is not to cheat others. I may piss them off, but I'm not going to cheat them. Those non-negotiable values are things that our country has lost tune with, and we make excuses for that. So just like one of my best friends happens to be a Jew guy. He's a Jew. He's Jewish. And his life is centered around beliefs that he and I discuss all the time. And guess what? There's not a whole lot that he says I don't disagree with. I don't disagree, period. Because it's about people and how we treat each other. Yet the very thing Christian nationalists would do to us is to get us to hate the Jew, to hate the Muslim, to hate. And that's what gives them their bonding. And you can get caught up in it without even realizing that it's been done to you. And it's just like the gentleman's question or comment. When you get into a situation where you're letting hate drive you, the minister of that church, that's your leader. And he's let you get to that point. You should be questioning whether or not that should be the leader of your church, or if you should be one of the sheep in that flock. I'm going to put my hand like this. That means it's your turn.
As you're talking, as you were talking, it just struck me how with Christian nationalism, it's doubly hypocritical, because it's antithetical to everything that this country was supposed to be, and it's antithetical also to everything that Jesus taught, and so it is the height of hypocrisy. But I also want to say, Dan, you spoke about that we don't want to paint all Christians with the same broad brush, and I want to say that I know from my own experience, I have Christian friends, Christian family who know better than this, who are good people, and who actually do walk the walk and talk the talk. And I think we need more of them to speak out. I think some already do, but we need more of them to take a stand against this total perversion of their faith. I think that's just a fine ending note for me and for this show. Dan, do you have any last words before we go?
Well, I just appreciate getting to say what I think. As you get older, not many people ask you what you think. So thanks for asking me on, and good luck. I think that what you're trying to do is inform people, and the more informed we are, the better choices we make. So, what's that mean?
Well said. Well, Dan, thank you so much. My turn. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for the super chats. Very much appreciate that. Till next time, this has been Atheologica, where religion is fascinating and stupid.